Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Point of Disorder Shorts. Today we have State Representative Dylan Wegela here in the house with us. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, I appreciate you not being up at the policy conference and coming in to hang.
I don't think you could pay me to go up there. Also love the improvements of the studio here. We are on the rise, and it's nice to see that we're on video now.
Yeah, well, we have Jeremy and Gage back there to thank for this. So.
Producer Jeremy also on the show today, new face. Well, I've been here before, but glad to be back.
Yeah, the policy conference, not somewhere you'll find me probably ever. We'll see. I don't want to never say never, as the great Justin Bieber once said, but we'll see if I end up going up there at some point.
Well, I can certainly say nobody on the island has a no war but class war hat on, so bonus points for that today. We wanted to bring you on the pod because you've been one of the few state representatives to kind of be vocal about what's happening in Gaza right now. A few days ago, we had some movement on a court case that we've been following. You had written a letter back in April demanding for Mahmoud Khalil to be returned to his family. So he was arrested unlawfully and detained and put in an ICE detention center for protesting.
Yeah, essentially Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, argued that his protest had, I think he called it, adverse foreign policy consequences, and that was the justification for his detention.
Yeah, so Dylan, you wrote a letter urging his release. Can you tell us about your motivation and?
Yeah. So first off, I think Gaza is the defining moral issue of our time. And I think we will be looking back on this decades from now and studying how did so many people remain silent while a genocide was being live streamed across the world, essentially. And how did we allow our government to fund it? And how did we not do something? So it's really been pushing my conscience to figure out what can I do, not being a federal rep. What can I do not having the strings and the biggest microphone in the world, right? I'm a state rep. I can do some things. So that led us in our office to, before the Mahmoud Khalil letter, we supported Uncommitted, which I know we'll come back to later. We've been continuously posting. I remember very early on posting about how Israel bombed a hospital, and there was this debate whether that was even real or not, or whether they did or not. And look at the state of the hospitals across Gaza now. I think it's been very clear what has happened. So when the Trump administration disappeared Mahmoud Khalil to the detention centers based on political reasons for simply organizing protests, we decided we had to do something. So we put out our call for a letter. We really had a tight timeline at first and got, I think about 15 people or 20 people signed on. We only gave people 24 hours. So, and some people were I would have signed on if I knew. And we were just, time was of the essence. So we're trying to get this out into the political space as far as possible. We sent it to all state reps and state senators' offices to sign on, as well as some local elected officials we knew would be favorable to the cause. And then we started rolling out every week for about a month, getting more and more people signed on to the letter. I think the last time we did this was towards the end of April, and we started moving towards some other organizing because more and more people were getting snatched off the street, and some have been released and some haven't. People being sent to torture prisons in foreign countries, as you know. So anyway, we ended up with about 50 plus signers across the state, and we've kind of moved on to organizing around other things. But I'm glad to see that there's been a favorable case, but he's still detained. What we decided to do in the meantime was put out this statement on our social medias, calling for an end to the genocide, making sure we were intentional about using that language, because I think some people are hesitant. Even as we were discussing before the show, Senator Bernie Sanders is hesitant to use the word genocide. He's instead calling it a war. But, I think, and I wanted to bring the definition into the studio because the definition of genocide is the deliberate and systematic destruction of a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. And I don't know how we can look at what's happening without calling it a genocide. A lot of groups are starting to call it a genocide. I believe Human Rights Watch has, and Amnesty International, various UN experts. The International Court of Justice has said that it's plausible that this is a genocide. And just recently, a group of 380 writers and groups signed onto a letter calling it one. What we've seen is 53,000 and more than that, I think, since I've last found that statistic, Palestinians have been killed. 166 journalists have been killed, which is just an incredible amount. And there's also been reports of Israel intentionally targeting journalists, which is a war crime. The blocking of food and water to the region, which is also a war crime. And the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu if he comes into their places. So I think the evidence is undeniable. And I think first and foremost, having U.S. citizens recognize that our dollars are funding a genocide across the world, that is like a baseline level that we need to start getting people to understand if they don't already. I think your rank and file person in this state has a pretty good understanding of that. And I think the polling is starting to show that. Yeah. But I think why can't we talk about it? That is my biggest question.
I feel like, well, just this week, Ireland and Spain have decided to put out sanctions against Israel. And oddly enough, the State Department is weighing on letting Amal Clooney back into the country because she's working on the court case with the ICC. But I mean, from a social media perspective, my feed right now on TikTok and Reels, it's like, you know, girl walking through burning school, people lined up in cages walking miles to get food, and then like dog videos. Like, it's just like, I feel like we're being desensitized, and I don't know how to stop that. But like, I feel like people need to just pause on this and really reflect like what we're watching in real time happening right now.
And I think there's a level of fatigue, right? I mean, as like a human being, I think there's a little bit of collective trauma to opening up your feed and seeing children being mutilated. And there's, I think, fatigue to not want to pay attention to that, right? It's seeing that is not fun, and wanting to just enjoy existing and not be purview to that. I can understand that. But at the same time, you know, what we're seeing is that both political parties are complicit in the genocide, are complicit in what's happening, and trying to silence the voices that are trying to speak out. I mean, our government invited Netanyahu to a joint address of Congress. Was that what, July of 2024, I believe? It's horrifying, and I think that's what compels me to speak out, regardless of what it costs. I mean, we've seen members of Congress be kicked out of Congress because of their stances on these issues. I'm referring to Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman.
Yeah.
I think AIPAC, I was again bringing this up before, spent $8 million to oust Cori Bush, and then other groups worked with them, and something like over $20 million to oust Jamal Bowman, resulting in two of the most expensive races for Congress in the history. So we're essentially allowing a foreign country's interest group to buy our elections. And I implore people to think about this. Like in Michigan, we always talk about how DTE is buying different elections, right? Special interest groups with immense power. We're seeing that federally, and unfortunately, they were successful in those two cases.
I was just going to say, you named two members of the, Congressional Progressive Caucus. Well, Michigan
Also two DSA members.
Michigan was home to a third member of the Progressive Caucus, Andy Levin, who also was ousted because of AIPAC money.
Yeah, so we're seeing it across the spectrum in Lansing, and I think it's not in line with what the majority of Americans, I believe at this moment.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I've seen polling that says, 70% of Democrats are against this war, want it to end immediately, want aid to be given. Like, why hasn't the party really reacted to that?
It's a good question.
Yeah. I'm not asking you for an actual answer, but
I think though, like what we're seeing, especially in corporate media spaces, is the inability to recognize that this is a genocide or recognize some of the horrors that are going on. I think we're starting to see some of that start to shift more recently. I think if I'm not mistaken, I believe like even Tucker Carlson has said some things, and Candace Owens are starting to recognize some of the issues of what's going on. But it's taking a while. So I think we're finally seeing it kind of break through to, especially our older generations are starting to see that, right? If you're younger and you're hopping on social media and you're seeing in real time what is happening to people, it's really hard to ignore. And also again, 166 or so, and I think that number was according to, just to give that for the people listening, the International Federation of Journalists. 166 journalists have been targeted, and some killed incidentally, obviously. But the point is, the people covering this are even being targeted themselves. So
Obviously, we've seen these like dramatic escalations under the Trump administration. Things have got significantly worse, endorsed by people like Marco Rubio and Donald Trump. But I think a lot of people fairly argue that Democrats like Joe Biden paved the way for what we're seeing now. So how do you think about, even just rhetorically, the role of liberals and Democrats in getting us to this point?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I think what we've seen is, again, both parties have cozied up to the Netanyahu regime by sending arms and funding. But we've seen that not only like now, we've seen that historically as well. The United States supporting the Israeli government in different cases. But what we are seeing, I think, and I don't know if this is me just kind of bringing us to a different area, we're seeing the government through the Trump administration, but also here in the state of Michigan through our attorney general, clamp down on dissenting voices, right? Student protesters. We had, students charged, and then the charges were dropped. We also had homes raided on warrants with no arrests made. So I think these tactics of intimidation and fear, just like with Mahmoud Khalil, there's been no charges, are being used by both leaders in both parties on this issue. And I think that is dangerous to free speech. I think it is dangerous to this country. But also the reality is, if we're going to fight fascism in the federal level with people being disappeared to foreign countries, torture prisons, and maybe the suspension of habeas corpus, we definitely have to be willing to risk something as individuals. And I've tried to use my office in any way I can to speak out about this, and I always feel like I'm not doing enough. I think there are people who have put their careers on the line, and I think we have to be willing to do that if we want to live in a free and just society. So
yeah, and like these those student protesters, they're often like legally charged with trespassing or some other
resisting arrest.
Yeah, exactly. But there's often these like very ugly smears conflating anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in the media. That's even done by like our elected officials. That feels like very uniquely dangerous. Any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think like anti-Semitism is wrong, but conflating what's happening to the Palestinians to that is just it's not based in reality. Is the way that I look at that, because it is one thing to, I'm trying to find the words here, because this is something I think we really want to be careful with how we talk about, because like for example, like I supported one of my colleagues' anti-hate crimes legislation. I think hate crimes are bad and dangerous. I think that the murder of the two assembly members and political violence is never ever acceptable and should be rejected at face value across the board. Even when Donald Trump was attempted assassination, I think that it's dangerous when society starts assassinating political leaders. But I also, at my core, I do not believe in non-secular countries existing. Or apartheid states, right? And I also reject the idea that we cannot coexist having multi-religious countries and states where everyone has the same rights. South Africa became a better nation when apartheid ended. And I think, to me, and I know not everyone agrees with me on that principle, but I believe we need to be able to coexist in a world where everybody is safe from persecution, and that includes our Jewish population. But we also are seeing some really good groups stand up, like Jewish Voices for Peace are fighting just alongside right now. And I think that this is about, whether it was the Black Lives Matter movement or it was this movement. It is about standing up for what is right and standing together in solidarity against the classes that control things that want us to be fighting each other for various reasons.
You both brought up like student protesters being vilified. I'm wondering because like in the past, Michigan has seen the highest youth voter turnout rate of any state in the nation. 2024 rolls around and we see a big drop off in voters between 18 and 24 years old. Do you guys think that this has something to do with that?
Yeah, I think it's certainly part of the equation because I think people are recognizing that the interest of the warmongers, the military-industrial complex, the ruling classes in this society are not aligned with those of peace and those of justice and for freedom, quite frankly. And I think that people seeing the inaction or the inability for the Democratic Party to do anything on that scenario for people who really cared about it, that certainly made them pull away. But I think it's too simple of an answer for why young people didn't come out.
Yeah.
Because I believe more than anything, the reason young people are leaving the Democratic Party or refusing to vote is because they don't see themselves in the party. They see this party like here in Michigan, the last 2 years gave $4.5 billion to corporations. They see that and they're wondering, why are my tax dollars through Democrats being funded to the wealthiest corporations in the state?
If we go back to the policy conference earlier this week, go on the website, and there are more corporate logos on there than on the side of a NASCAR right now. So, every photo I saw a DTE logo on it. So, absolutely. I mean, we're giving corporations tax incentives and not getting anything back, and then we're funding wars, and people don't have health care. So
yeah, they don't have health care, they don't have roads that are properly funded or schools that are properly funded. And this is my take, take it or leave it, I guess. But I think young people are becoming more and more hyper aware that our current system of capitalism works for the wealthiest in this country, but it does not work for working class people or themselves. They have massive amounts of student loan debt. I pay $700 a month in student loans myself with me and my wife. And it's just kind of an insane proposition. You're told to go get the education and we only have like $80,000 in student loan debt. I say only because I know people who have hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I think people want to have a society organized in a way where there is universal health care for people. Housing is guaranteed as a right. People have access to food and water. It is human nature to want people to have the base necessities. And we have a system of government that is supported by two political parties in capitalism that are working against what the vast majority of people want. And I think people are becoming more and more aware of that. We have the most educated groups of people coming up than we've ever had. And that's one of the reasons I call myself a democratic socialist and have been really pushing against the notion that parties that work on behalf of capital are the future. I think we are going to see some changes over the next couple of years.
What's your message to those that feel hopeless and like there's nothing they can do to help the genocide in Gaza?
I think we have to keep fighting. And I think like I look at both issues similarly in the way we have to approach them because we have a fascist government right now, and we have to recognize that we have to fight fascism here. And by fighting fascism here, it might lead to a new form of government that maybe has human interest across the globe at heart, that is an anti-war government, that is one that doesn't want to fund a genocide. And we have to hit the streets. We have to boycott. And if you care a lot about the Palestinian movement, look into the boycott and divest movement. And you can go to some websites. If you just Google that, you'll find the groups that have been doing this for, I think, since 2005. You can start fighting that's what students were fighting for at the universities, is divesting, right? But I think really more than anything, we just don't have the right or the privilege to give up right now, because if we do, even though it's hard, if we do, then we are ceding power to evil people like Donald Trump.
Yep.
And we cannot allow that to happen here. If that happens here, the state of the world is in a much worse place. And I think everyone should be paying attention to what's happening with habeas corpus and whether or not they're going to suspend that. I think people should be preparing for a mass general strike and should be starting to get more and more comfortable with the idea is I might have to put some skin in the game. I might have to risk something beyond a protest and beyond a boycott. Civil disobedience has been practiced in this country for a long time, and it is one of the reasons the civil rights movement was so successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. Well, Representative Wegela, thank you for coming on. Any closing final thoughts?
No, thanks for having me on. I think it is important to have these kind of conversations, be it that I think in the general zeitgeist, they can be considered uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I just try to speak from the conscience, from the heart, and let that guide. And I think hopefully if people have any feedback or any questions, or if we didn't clarify something, they reach out. I would love to have the opportunity to do so.
No, appreciate you talking about this because this topic seems to always be the elephant in the room. So this episode is to just lay it all out on the line.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming in, and we hope you come back soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, bye, everyone.
Bye.